So basically, for myself, I began taking on the tar sands, which many people have called one of the most destructive energy projects in the world. Back in 2010, that's when I came up with a international day of action called International Stop the Tar Sands Day. The basic idea behind International Stop the Tar Sands Day was I wanted to raise awareness about what was happening in Canada. At that time, I'd been living in Germany, Berlin specifically, for a number of years, and I knew, or at least I noticed, a lot of people hadn't heard of the tar sands before. Like anytime I brought it up, people were thought that I was talking about Tarzan, the guy who swings in the jungle and saves Jane. So I thought, okay, well, maybe it's about time that we start teaching people outside of Canada what's going on in a really, really beautiful part of our country. So that was my main impetus. So I began in the summer of 2010 going to various European capitals, 5 to be specific, talking to different groups and activists if they'd be interested to help me try and raise awareness on this particular issue. The reason why I wanted to do it in the summer was I also knew that there'd be a lot of Canadian tourists coming into these European hotspots during the summer. So in that sense, it would work both ways. You'd have Europeans learning about what was happening in Canada, and on the other side, you see Canadians, well, I guess, coming face to face with the consequences of what we were doing in Alberta. So it was supposed to, I guess, knock off 2 birds with 1 stone. Went really well, exceeded my expectations. I wanted 5 demos in 5 cities. I wound up getting 9. Next year, it grew to over 50. That ran for about 3 years. Stopped doing it. The last one was in 2012. I moved back to Canada shortly after that and decided, okay, I've done my acting internationally. Now I want to do more stuff locally. And that's when I found out that there was going to be a tar sands pipeline going right through the town where I grew up. So the timing was actually quite strange for me, for my life. Well, so this would be the Line 9 pipeline. Unfortunately, that project did get approved, but it was definitely my first kick at the can organizing locally. And since then, I've also been trying to help out groups involved in the Energy East pipeline campaign. And if you guys haven't heard about Energy East yet, it's from TransCanada. TransCanada is the same company behind Keystone XL. But Energy East, if it's approved, would be the biggest tar sands pipeline in North America. So that's what I've been up to lately.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. You've obviously, I read the lot of stuff you've done on these, Mark, and you have talked a lot about those projects. What do you feel? Where do you feel the Canadian perception is with climate change these days? I mean, there's obviously suffering from Stephen Harper's climate skeptic view kind of thing, but obviously now you have Trudeau coming in again and having a more pro climate agenda. You still haven't really want to talk about a climate connection towards the Fort McMurray wildfire.
No, it's definitely an interesting time. So obviously Trudeau, or Prime Minister Trudeau, is a huge improvement on what we had with Stephen Harper, but the bar was so damn low to begin with. Anybody probably would have been an improvement on Harper. I gotta give, as much as I do get annoyed with the current federal government, because they're still pushing for tar sands pipelines. It's not like they're saying, okay, we'll stop tar sands expansion and we're gonna just go completely into clean energy. Basically, he wants both. He wants to expand the tar sands, and he also wants to move Canada back to being some sort of responsible climate player on the international field, which I would like to find out how you can do that. I have not seen any data to back that up, that you can be a clean energy country and a dirty oil country at the exact same time. If it's possible, great. If it's not, let's start having an adult conversation in Canada about how we're going to wean ourselves off this particular destructive industry and move towards the clean energy economy we need to get to. So it is an improvement. We're still not quite there yet. We have federal government that says this is the direction we definitely need to go. to achieve that low carbon economy I was referring to before. And but it is a tricky situation. Like I said, I do have a certain degree of sympathy for the federal government, just because Canadians been told for the last 10 years because of Harper that no, oil and gas, we got to drill baby drill, pump baby pump. And now you have to undo a lot of that. So it's not an easy situation. And I in my heart, I believe they want to do the right thing. Just haven't quite found the right way to do it yet.
It's awfully right at heart. This is awfully tricky kind of thing that Canada's economy is a very fossil fuel, hydrocarbon based economy. And from an activist or writer's point of view, do you think that it can somehow damage the cause that you make those connections to climate change and extreme weather then quite fast? How much you followed the whole Fort McMurray kind of debate and what's going on, but there's been quite quickly a few articles out saying this is climate change, and people then kick back and saying that how can you be so insensitive? There's people can't lose their life now. We should kind of concentrate on actually dealing with this crisis situation. We shouldn't start talking about climate change. And what is your view? How carefully should you take that when you have extreme weather events happening, that direct scientific connection that they're linked to?
Okay, I got part of that question, so I'm just going to answer the part that I understood. Yeah, it's like, first of all, what's happened is absolutely devastating, and I guess what makes it even worse is like Alberta's been hurting so badly to begin with because of the drop in oil prices. Like, if you look at the stats, obviously unemployment's way up in Alberta, but on top of that, you have domestic violence going up, you have visits to food banks going up, etc. Like, the province was already hurting, and now you have this devastating fire making things so much worse. So I can understand from the people on the one side who say, no, it's a little insensitive right now to talk about climate change, its connection to the fire, just because Alberta was already suffering and now they're hurting even more. I personally think there is a sensitive way you can talk about it. So in my opinion, no, I don't think it is too soon to talk about climate change. But you can't talk about it in the sense that, well, Fort McMurray is the center of the oil industry. They had this coming. That is completely wrong and very insensitive. Now, Canada's had forest fires before. Canada will have forest fires again. You're not going to find or it'll be very hard to find a climate scientist, and Paul is the climate scientist, so you correct on me, who's going to say there's a direct link between this fire and what's happening to climate change. And I'm not a climate scientist. I come from more of a writer's background, but from my layman understanding of things, as the planet gets warmer, things get drier, and yeah, it just, the potential for these things to happen increases. I'm not going to say there's a direct link between climate change and what's happened in Fort McMurray, because I can't really prove that.
No.
But I do think you can still have that discussion in the sense that we've had this horrible thing happening. We know these horrible things, extreme weather events, as you call them, will happen more frequently. That's what the climate science has been telling us. What are we going to do about it? So for me, out of this, what's happened in Fort McMurray, and like I said, it's a really sad, horrible thing that's happened. I'm hoping the conversation is going to start shifting to what are we going to do to create a world where we can decrease the frequency of these occurrences happening.
I mean, I guess what one could say without mentioning climate change for sure is that that there has been more intense dry in the area of Fort McMurray for the last couple of months than it normally is this time of year, and obviously that has in some way contributed to the likelihood of a fire, I think. And also what we is that to the amount of carbon being released due to forest fires is obviously have a very big impact on CO2 emissions and stuff like that. So that is obviously a tragic event that actually not only could this be linked to climate change, but also climate change because you're releasing more emissions. And you're probably right in saying that, okay, you have to look at solutions. How can we both future-proof it, and how can we actually switch our energy system to a cleaner one?
No, definitely. And that, I got to say, this is the thing that's been driving me absolutely nuts with the conversations that were taking place before the fire, during, and now afterwards is we haven't actually had that conversation yet in Canada. How exactly are we going to transition places like Alberta, and there's other provinces in Canada that are big in oil and gas? How are we going to transition them off a fossil fuel intensive economy like that to the clean energy economy? So we know we're here with fossil fuels. We know we got to get there, but nobody's talking about in between. Now, a lot of time activists and academics, I suppose as well, throw around that term just transition. So how are we going to transition our society in a good way that doesn't completely decimate communities from the current economy have to that clean energy economy we need to get to? This is the conversation we really need to be having in Canada right now, and nobody's explaining exactly how we're going to take a place like Alberta that it is dependent on oil and gas, but it's also got a booming tourism industry, and they're big in agriculture as well. There's other things this province can do, and if you look at the potential for solar and wind, it's amazing. It's one of the best spots to go big in clean energy. So we know where we need to get to, but everything in between we're not talking about. We need a plan to figure out how to transition a province like Alberta and other provinces that are dependent on fossil fuels to where we need to get to. And I'd really like to see that conversation start happening soon here.
Well, yeah, I think that's that's indeed a very good point. And can I just, before we close up, can I just finally get your view as a Canadian or based in Canada? Who's going to take that discussion forward? Who is the leaders in actually taking Canada to that new future in terms of both on the activist side, on the community side, on the political side?
That's a damn good question. Like, in theory, it should be Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but I don't see it coming from him right now. You do have some provincial leaders who aren't too bad, but it's I guess back to the grassroots, and I have to really tip my hat and give a really standing ovation to quite a few Indigenous leaders and activists in Canada who've really been pushing this conversation all the way, especially when it comes to tar sands extraction. Like, they're really the ones that were ringing the warning bells of what was happening.
I mean, yeah, can I just come in there and say, obviously, that's something we didn't really discuss, and obviously something that's really critical to discussion, because Indigenous groups, they have been at the front line of facing the energy kind of expansion from tar sands, but they're also the groups who are really vulnerable to climate change. So they're facing two battles now. They're facing a battle from energy, but also a battle from these extreme, really probably hurting them more than anyone else.
Definitely, and even like you said, that they're kind of getting it on double fronts there. But quite a few Indigenous leaders and individuals have that kind of grit and determination to keep on going. And I thought one interesting interview I had recently was with an Indigenous activist who's based in Alberta. And she was talking about how renewable energy is actually one of the first times it's kind of in line with Indigenous values. Instead of from the earth to destroying the earth, they're actually working with the earth. And I thought it was a really beautiful statement on her part, that in energy, there's something that could finally bring Canada or even the world in line with a lot of Indigenous views and values. So I think there's a lot of potential in that. Back to your original question, who's going to drive this conversation in the direction that needs to go? Like I said, I think it's going to be people on the grassroots. We do have some really great environmental groups here, and we do have some amazing activists, and I think it's really going to be them. Their organizing capabilities is going to push the conversation in the direction it needs to go. Political leaders, obviously we have Elizabeth May, who's a lovely leader of the Green Party, who she does her best, I think, to try and get that conversation going in the right direction. But I really think which with the climate movement in general in the world, it's really going to be something that's going to be from the bottom up, not top down.